My name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm 36 years old, and I grew up knowing with absolute certainty that I didn't belong to my family. Not because anyone ever explicitly told me that I was unwanted, but because my grandmother had told me, when I was 7 years old, that I was adopted. She told me that my parents had picked me out of an orphanage. She told me that my biological parents didn't want me. She told me that I should be grateful to my parents for choosing me, but that I was fundamentally different from the rest of the family because I didn't share their blood. And I believed her. For 29 years, I believed her. The moment she told me, this is burned into my memory with a clarity that surprises me even now. We were in her kitchen. It was a Saturday afternoon. My mother and father were out running errands. I was supposed to be spending the day with my grandmother, which was something that happened regularly. My grandmother raised me partially. She was a presence in my daily life. She was someone I trusted. She was doing the dishes when she told me. I was sitting at her kitchen table, doing homework. I was in second grade. I was 7 years old. I asked her a question about something I'd heard at school. Some kid had said that I looked like my dad, and I'd said yes, I did look like my dad. And the kid had said no, that didn't make sense, because if I was adopted, I wouldn't look like him. I didn't know what adopted meant. I asked my grandmother what the kid meant, and instead of saying, "Don't listen to kids who say mean things," my grandmother turned around from the sink. She looked at me with an expression I now recognize as calculated, and she said, "Well, sweetheart, you are adopted. Your parents chose you from an orphanage when you were a baby. Your real parents didn't want you." I remember feeling like the floor had disappeared. I remember feeling like I was falling. I remember trying to understand what she was saying. I was 7 years old. I didn't have the cognitive framework to understand adoption. I didn't understand that some people chose to adopt babies. I understood only that my grandmother had just told me that my parents weren't really my parents, and that my real parents didn't want me. I asked her if it was true. She said yes. I asked her why my parents hadn't told me. She said that they were probably waiting until I was older to explain it properly. I asked her why the kid at school knew about it. She said that people talked, and that's how these things get around. I asked her if I was still her granddaughter. She said yes, but that I should remember that I was a granddaughter by choice, not by blood, and that I should be grateful for that choice. Then she went back to doing the dishes, as if she'd just told me something neutral, something normal, something that didn't completely destroy the way I understood my own existence. I was terrified to ask my parents about it. I was terrified that they would confirm what my grandmother had said. I was terrified that they would look at me with pity, or worse, with resentment, that they would admit that they'd chosen me out of obligation rather than out of love. So I didn't ask them. I just lived with the knowledge that I didn't belong, that I was different, that I was chosen rather than born. And slowly, that knowledge changed me. It made me hyper vigilant to any hint that I wasn't part of the family. It made me interpret normal family interactions through the lens of my adopted status. When my parents were frustrated with me, I thought, they regret choosing me. When they were happy with me, I thought, they're being nice because I'm adopted, and they feel bad for me. When my younger brother was born, a year after my parents told me I was adopted, though they didn't frame it the way my grandmother had, they simply confirmed what she'd told me. I thought that they'd had him because they wanted a child who was actually theirs. I became the perfect child. I was desperate to prove that I deserved the choice my parents had made. I got good grades. I was compliant. I was quiet. I didn't ask for much. I tried to be so good that my parents would never regret choosing me. I tried to be so perfect that no one would ever think that I was less than. I was performing gratitude for my existence from the age of 7 years old. My grandmother never brought it up again. She never explained it further. She never answered my questions about it. Questions I asked only in my head, never out loud. She just left me with that knowledge, that burden, and let me carry it alone. The impact on my childhood was profound. I was anxious. I was insecure. I questioned whether people really liked me or if they were just being nice to me because I was the poor adopted girl. I questioned whether I belonged in school, in my friend groups, in my extended family. I questioned my right to take up space. I questioned whether I was really part of anything or just a guest in everyone's life. When I was a teenager, I asked my parents if I could meet my biological parents. My mother cried. She said, "Becca, you are our daughter. We don't care where you came from. You are ours. We chose you because we loved you, not because we felt obligated to. And we don't have any interest in finding your biological parents unless that's something you really truly want." My father said, "You are my daughter in every way that matters. I'm your dad. I will always be your dad. That's not something that changes based on genetics." But instead of this reassuring me, it made me feel worse. Because if they loved me so much, if they were so certain that I was theirs, why had they let my grandmother tell me I was adopted? Why hadn't they sat me down and explained it in a way that made me feel loved and chosen instead of abandoned and thrown away? And if they really loved me that much, why was I so terrified all the time that they didn't? I carried this with me into adulthood. I had relationships that were marked by my fear of abandonment. I had friendships that were marked by my constant fear that people would realize I wasn't worth knowing. I had a career that was marked by my desperate need to prove myself, to show that I was capable, to demonstrate that I deserved the opportunities I'd been given. I went to therapy. I talked about my adoption and how it had affected me. My therapist helped me understand that my grandmother's words had been weaponized against me. My therapist helped me understand that my parents loved me. My therapist helped me understand that my adopted status wasn't something shameful or something I needed to apologize for, but understanding something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things. And I was stuck in the gap between understanding and feeling for years. When I was 34 years old, I did something that I'd been thinking about doing for a long time. I took a DNA test, not because I wanted to find my biological parents, not because I wanted to change my understanding of who my family was, but because I wanted closure. I wanted to understand my origins. I wanted to have information about my health. I wanted to take control of my own narrative instead of letting it be something that was done to me. I took the test at home. I sent in my saliva sample. I waited for the results. When the results came back, I was sitting at my desk at work. I opened the email from the DNA testing company, and I scrolled through the results, looking at my ancestry breakdown, looking at my genetic markers, looking at the information that was supposed to tell me about where I came from. And then I saw something that made me stop. I saw a match that showed 25% of my DNA, which meant a parent, not an adoptive parent, a biological parent, and the name attached to that match was my father who had raised me, my father who I'd always thought was my adoptive father. I read that sentence over and over again. I couldn't make sense of it. The DNA test was saying that my father was my biological father. The DNA test was saying that I was not adopted. The DNA test was saying that everything my grandmother had told me was a lie. I started shaking. I left work. I drove to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up. I walked into their living room where my mother was folding laundry, and I said, "Am I adopted?" My mother looked at me with confusion. She said, "No, honey. You're not adopted. Why would you ask that?" I said, "Grandmother told me I was adopted when I was 7 years old. She told me my parents didn't want me, and you chose me out of an orphanage." I took a DNA test. The results say my father is my biological father. So the DNA test says I'm not adopted, but I've spent my whole life believing that I was, so I need to know the truth. My mother's face changed. I watched her understand what had happened. I watched her realize what my grandmother had done, and she started crying. She said, "Oh my God. Oh my God, Rebecca. I am so sorry. You are not adopted. You were never adopted. You are our biological daughter. Your grandmother lied to you." My father came home while we were talking. My mother told him what I'd said. He looked devastated. He said, "Your grandmother told you that you were adopted?" I said, when I was 7, and I believed her. I've believed her for 29 years. He said, Rebecca, that's not true. You are our daughter. You are our biological daughter. We would never have adopted you and then lied about it. We would never have let your mother's mother tell you something like that without correcting her. My mother said, we didn't know she told you that. If we'd known, we would have shut it down immediately. We would have made it clear that you were ours, that you were our biological child, that your grandmother had no right to say something like that to you. I said, why would she tell me that if it wasn't true? My mother looked at my father, and my father said, because she wanted to hurt you, because she wanted to control you, and I'm ashamed that we didn't protect you from her. My mother said, your grandmother has always been cruel. She's always used shame and fear to control people, but we should have shielded you from that. We should have been more protective, and I'm so sorry that we weren't. I spent that night at my parents' house. We talked about my grandmother. My parents told me that my grandmother had a pattern of behavior that was designed to control and manipulate. She had done similar things to my mother. She had told my mother, when my mother was young, that she was ungrateful, that she should appreciate what she'd been given, that she wasn't as talented or as beautiful as her siblings. My grandmother had used shame and fear as tools of control. And when I was born, my grandmother had seen an opportunity to continue that pattern with me. She had seen a way to make me feel fundamentally different from my family, fundamentally unworthy, fundamentally unwanted. She had told me I was adopted as a way to ensure that I would always be insecure, always be trying to prove myself, always be grateful for the bare minimum of love and attention. It was a deliberate act of cruelty. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something she said without thinking. It was calculated. It was weaponized. I had to sit with that for a while. I had to understand that the person I'd trusted, the person I'd thought was trying to help me understand my place in the world, had actually been trying to damage me. I had to understand that my grandmother had deliberately lied to me, deliberately hurt me, with the intention of controlling me. And then I had to decide what to do about it. I decided that I was going to confront my grandmother. I decided that I was going to tell her that I knew about the lie. I decided that I was going to make her face what she had done. I decided that I was going to demand an apology, not for my own healing. I knew by then that my healing wasn't dependent on my grandmother's apology, but for the principle of the thing. I was going to force her to confront the harm she had caused. I called her. I said, Grandmother, I need to talk to you about something. Can I come over? She said yes. I went to her house on a Saturday afternoon. It was almost exactly 29 years after the day she had told me I was adopted in that same kitchen. I sat down at her kitchen table, and I said, you told me when I was 7 years old that I was adopted. You told me my biological parents didn't want me. You told me I should be grateful to my parents for choosing me. And for 29 years, I believed you. I carried that belief with me everywhere. It affected my relationships, my career, my understanding of myself. And I just found out through a DNA test that it was a lie. I am not adopted. I am my parents' biological daughter. So I'm here to ask you why you told me that lie. My grandmother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I don't remember saying that. I said, you do remember. You remember because it was deliberate. You remember because you knew exactly what you were doing. So I'm asking you again, why did you lie to me? She said, I might have said something like that, but I didn't mean anything by it. I was probably just joking around. You're being too sensitive about something that happened almost 30 years ago. I said, you told a 7-year-old child that she was adopted, that her parents didn't want her, and that she should be grateful to have been chosen. That's not a joke. That's not something you say by accident. That's a deliberate, calculated act designed to hurt a child and make her feel unwanted. So I need you to acknowledge what you did. I need you to apologize. She said, I'm not going to apologize for something I don't remember saying clearly. You're being dramatic and ungrateful, the way you always are. I've done so much for you, and this is how you repay me. by coming here and accusing me of lying. And that's when I understood that I was never going to get the apology I wanted. I was never going to get the acknowledgement I deserved. My grandmother was never going to take responsibility for what she'd done. She was going to deny it, minimize it, gaslight me about it, and make me the villain for having the audacity to confront her about her cruelty. But I also understood something else in that moment. I understood that I didn't need her apology. I understood that her refusal to acknowledge what she'd done didn't change the fact that she'd done it. I understood that her denial didn't negate the harm that had been caused. And I understood that I had the power to walk away from her, to refuse to accept her narrative, to simply leave. So I said, "You're right. I am being ungrateful. I'm ungrateful for spending 29 years of my life believing a lie that you told me. I'm ungrateful for the anxiety and insecurity and shame that I carried because of that lie. I'm ungrateful for the relationships I sabotaged and the opportunities I didn't take because I was too busy trying to prove that I deserved to exist. I'm so incredibly ungrateful for all of that. And because I'm so ungrateful, I think it's best if we don't see each other anymore." I'm done. I stood up and I walked out of her house, and I didn't look back. The interesting thing that happened next is what I'd call forced family reckoning. My parents told my aunts and uncles what my grandmother had done. They explained how she had lied to me about being adopted. They explained how that lie had affected me, how it had shaped my entire childhood and adolescence and early adulthood. And my aunts and uncles realized that my grandmother had done similar things to them, that she had used shame and fear and lies as tools of control throughout their lives. One of my aunts told me that my grandmother had told her she was a disappointment, that she would never be as beautiful as her sisters, that she should be grateful for whatever man would marry her. Another uncle told me that my grandmother had told him he was stupid, that he would never amount to anything, that he should be grateful to his parents for supporting him. Another aunt told me that my grandmother had told her that she was selfish, that she didn't care about family, that she should be ashamed of herself for pursuing a career instead of being a good wife and mother. And suddenly, my grandmother's lie to me didn't seem like an isolated incident. It seemed like part of a pattern. It seemed like a consistent strategy that she used with everyone in the family. She used shame and fear and lies to keep people small, to keep people insecure, to keep people dependent on her approval. And so my family had to face what my grandmother was. They had to acknowledge the harm she had caused, and they had to make their own decisions about whether they wanted to continue to have a relationship with her. My mother decided to have a conversation with my grandmother. My mother told her that what she had done to me was unacceptable. My mother told her that my grandmother's pattern of behavior throughout our family was toxic and abusive. My mother told her that if my grandmother wanted to continue to have a relationship with her children and grandchildren, she needed to acknowledge what she'd done, apologize, and commit to changing. My grandmother refused. She said that she had never done anything wrong, that everyone in the family was ungrateful and dramatic, and that she didn't understand why everyone was ganging up on her. And so my family had to make a choice. And most of us chose to step back from my grandmother. We didn't completely cut her off. She was still our grandmother, still part of our family, but we established boundaries. We limited contact. We stopped trusting her with our emotional well-being. We protected ourselves and our children from her. My grandmother lived for another 5 years after my DNA test revelation. During those 5 years, she grew increasingly isolated. She complained constantly that nobody came to see her, that nobody cared about her, that her family had turned against her. She never acknowledged the harm she had caused. She never apologized. She never changed, and I watched her slow descent into loneliness with complicated feelings. I felt sad for her. I felt angry at her. I felt relieved that she was no longer in a position to hurt me. I felt guilty for feeling relieved, and mostly, I felt nothing. I felt the numbness that comes from finally accepting that someone you wanted to have a relationship with is simply not capable of being the person you need them to be. When my grandmother died, I didn't cry. I went to her funeral. I sat in the church. I listened to people say nice things about her, and I felt like I was watching someone else's life, someone else's family. I felt like I was a ghost at my own grandmother's funeral. But the important thing that happened as a result of the DNA test and the confrontation wasn't about my grandmother. It wasn't about getting her to apologize or admit what she'd done. The important thing was what happened to me. I got my life back. I finally understood that I was not adopted. I finally understood that my parents had wanted me, had chosen me deliberately, had loved me from the moment I was born. I finally understood that my anxiety and insecurity and shame were not because I deserved to feel those things, but because I had been deliberately lied to and hurt by someone I trusted. And with that understanding came freedom. I stopped trying to prove myself all the time. I stopped being terrified that people would leave me. I stopped believing that I needed to be perfect to deserve love and belonging. I stopped carrying the weight of my grandmother's cruelty as if it was my burden to bear. I went back to therapy, and my therapist helped me process the revelation. She helped me understand that my grandmother's lie had been a form of child abuse. She helped me understand that confronting my grandmother had been important, not because my grandmother needed to hear it, but because I needed to say it. She helped me understand that my grandmother's refusal to acknowledge what she'd done was part of her pattern, and that my acceptance of that refusal was a sign of my own growth. I rebuilt my relationships. I told my parents how much their love meant to me. I told them that I understood they hadn't known what my grandmother had said, and that I forgave them for not protecting me from something they didn't know was happening. They forgave themselves, and we became closer. I had a daughter when I was 35, and when she was born, I made a promise to her that I would never lie to her about who she was, that I would always be honest with her, that I would never use shame or fear or lies as tools of control. I promised her that she would always know that she was wanted, that she was loved, that she belonged, and I keep that promise every single day. What I learned from this experience is that lies about identity are particularly dangerous. When someone tells you that you don't belong, that you're fundamentally different, that you're unwanted, those lies burrow deep. They become part of how you see yourself. They shape the way you move through the world, and it takes an extraordinary amount of evidence and work to undo them. But the other thing I learned is that DNA tests and genetic science can be tools of liberation. They can give us information about ourselves that we never had before. They can reveal truths that people have tried to hide. They can help us reclaim our own narratives from people who tried to control them. And the most important thing I learned is that my grandmother's refusal to apologize, her refusal to acknowledge what she'd done, says nothing about whether I deserved an apology. It says everything about her. And the fact that she couldn't take responsibility for her cruelty, that she couldn't acknowledge the harm she caused, that she couldn't grow or change, that was her failure, not mine. So I'm Rebecca Martinez. I'm a woman who was lied to about her own identity for 29 years. I'm a woman whose grandmother tried to damage her with a lie about belonging. I'm a woman who confronted that lie and survived it. I'm a woman who chose to build a different kind of family, a kind of family based on truth and honesty and unconditional love. I'm a woman who knows with absolute certainty now that I belong. Not because someone chose me, but because I am wanted, I am loved, and I am home. That's my story. One lie told in a kitchen almost 30 years ago. One DNA test that proved the lie. One confrontation that changed everything. And one woman who finally knows who she is.